All right, good morning for those of you that are just joining us. Welcome to our slow cooker edition of Diabetes Cooking Club. I am Isabel Hinton, a health educator with Bronson's Community Health Advancement Department. And with us today, we have Kim House and Tina Wahardo, and I will let them introduce themselves.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Tina Wahardo. Thank you, Isabel, for that introduction. And yes, we do love to see smiling faces, and I do see some smiling faces, so thank you. I am part of the Community Health Advancement Department, and so today I will be doing your cooking demonstration today as part of the Diabetes Cooking Club. Thank you guys so much for registering and attending with us, and continue to register for our upcoming diabetes cooking clubs as well. We'd love to have you join us. Kim, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. I am Kim House. I am a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes care and education specialist. I'm located here in South Haven, the Bronson location, and I welcome you here today for some education in diabetes and slow cookers.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourself. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started into our content today. First and foremost, this class is being recorded, so if you would not like to be seen on screen, feel free to turn your camera off by wiggling the mouse at the bottom of the screen or at the top of your screen. You'll see a little camera button, and if there's an X, a red slash through it, that means that your camera is off. We do also ask that you keep your microphone muted just to save on background noise unless you are asking any questions. We also offer closed captioning, so if you need closed captioning, feel free to hit the CC button and you will be able to have closed captioning enabled. We understand that that is not 100% accurate, so if you are confused by any of the closed captioning that shows up on your screen, please drop a question in the chat and we will try to get your questions answered. And finally, thanks again for joining us for our Diabetes Cooking Club Slow Cooker Edition. So, as a quick disclosure, the information you hear today is intended as general health information and should not be used as a substitute for medical care or advice from your provider, but we hope you can get some interesting education out of this class as well. So with that being said, I will let Kim take it away.
So I'm going to introduce to you the agenda today. It looks quite robust, but what it comes down to is Tina is going to start off by assembling these two recipes we have for you today, which you should have found in your email we had provided you early this morning. I'm going to do some education on the benefits, the nutrients, the balance in diabetes, looking at closely into the nutrition profile of these recipes that we've provided you, talking about what we can do to enhance them, to make them blood sugar friendly, and also, just the versatility of using these slow cookers for meals. And also the end result is Tina showing off these meals and recipes that we have, and we'll leave it open if there's time for questions and answers. So, all right, Tina.
Perfect. All right. So you did receive your recipes in your email. I just wanted to share that we are going to assemble both of these recipes to get us kick-started, and then Kim's going to do the education. Today we are focusing on like a lunch dinner option, and then we're also going to feature a breakfast option too, using our slow cooker. I think a lot of times we think about that slow cooker and we think about it just kind of being like cooking during the day, and then we have that dinner option, but I absolutely love doing like the slow cooker for a breakfast option too. Have multiple servings of a breakfast on hand and in the refrigerator that you can simply warm up to ensure that you start your day off with a very nutritious breakfast option. So the first recipe that we are going to be assembling today is our slow cooker jambalaya. It is a very delicious recipe, a hearty recipe, but still, when we start looking at that carbohydrate content that Kim is going to discuss and the fiber content, It is very diabetes friendly, this recipe in particular. And I just love that Kim highlights all of those swaps and modifications that you can make to a recipe to kind of individualize it and personalize it to you and your needs and your food preferences. So today's jambalaya recipe we are going to do that is going to be very colorful. That's actually going to be our second recipe that we're going to put together. And so we're going to flip over to the next slide, which is going to feature our breakfast option. And this is a slow cooker quinoa breakfast casserole. I have never seen quinoa in a breakfast casserole before until we kind of wandered upon this recipe. But you know, if you've ever joined us in any of our previous classes before, we talk about quinoa a lot, or at least I talk about quinoa a lot. And so in this recipe, you are going to see that the quinoa kind of is used kind of as a potato replacement, essentially, right? It is the starch component of this breakfast casserole. But one thing that we're going to highlight, and I'm sure Kim is going to do so, is that quinoa has a lot of good plant-based protein and fiber in comparison to something that you would traditionally use like a diced potato or a hash brown. So a very simple recipe using something that's good protein, good fiber. We still got those eggs involved in there as well. And then we're loading it up with vegetables such as spinach and tomatoes. So that is the one that we are going to get started with. So as you, perfect, start seeing me. So if you're following along with your recipe today, as I mentioned, we're going to start out with our slow cooker breakfast casserole. I've got many things already assembled here today, so you're just going to see me put things together and then put them into the casserole dish. So as we get started with our recipe, we are starting with 6 whole eggs. And so one thing I was just thinking, and Kim might highlight this as well, when we start talking about swaps and modifications, there are options to do maybe less yolk if that is something that you are concerned about. But this recipe right now gets us started off with 6 whole eggs. And I'm just beating those real quick to get them all mixed up. And then from here, we are going to add our quinoa. So I would love to hear in the chat, how many of you guys, I've probably asked this question before, but how many of you all in the room today have used quinoa at all? Maybe cooked it as a side dish, used it as part of a recipe. Maybe quinoa can be used like as an oatmeal replacement too, for a breakfast option. So type that in the chat. I would love to hear how many people have used quinoa before. So this recipe is going to add in about 1/2 cup of dry quinoa. And today, this is a 100% pure quinoa. It is not a mix, even though I'm holding up a bag of ancient grains, which is a combination of different whole grains. But this is the bag generally that it would come in at the grocery store that you were looking for, and you would find that quinoa in like your rice and grain section. Isabel, what's everybody saying?
Yeah, so we have quite a few people saying that they have used quinoa before, that they enjoy quinoa. We have a couple of people saying they haven't, but they're excited to try it. They've used it before, they've never have used it before. So we've kind of got across the board quinoa, people who are familiar with quinoa.
All right, and then the last but not least, I see a never have used it. So I have went ahead and just added 1/2 cup of quinoa to my mix, and I'm just gonna, again, give it a little bit of a stir here. I know you probably can't see a good visual on this. I'm just gonna give that a stir. This recipe uses quite a bit more milk than a traditional breakfast casserole dish, just so it can get absorbed into that quinoa and cook that quinoa so that quinoa is not crunchy, but is a softer texture like quinoa should be once it's cooked. So we are using 1.5 cups of 1% milk, and we're just going to go ahead and get that poured into our bowl as well.
While you're doing that, there is a question. Nikki is wondering if that brand of quinoa needed to be rinsed.
So that is the general recommendation to rinse. I see that most often to rinse your quinoa. You know, I find, and you guys can tell me your experience, but I do think that quinoa is less bitter tasting if you rinse it off first before using it in a recipe or eating it. So I actually did not rinse mine, and I didn't taste it too much in my slow cooker recipe today. And I'll tell you why I did not rinse mine today, because in my home, I do not have a fine mesh strainer, which is something that you're going to really need in order to give that quinoa a good rinse in the sink. If you're just going to use your regular strainer or colander, those quinoa is just too small and it's going to fall through those holes. So rinse them if you prefer. I see the question about can you skip the salt? Absolutely. I added just a small amount of salt. And the reason why I added probably less than what the recipe called for is because once we kind of get further into this recipe, we're going to be getting salt from our cheese too. And so I know Kim is going to discuss that a little bit as well. So thank you guys so much for that question about the quinoa and asking about the salt. You absolutely can do that. So far, we've got our eggs in here, we've got our milk, we've got our quinoa, a little salt and pepper if you want to add that. But again, feel free to reduce that salt or simply skip that salt if that is your preference. From here, then, we are going to go ahead and add our veggies, our non-starchy vegetables, which Kim are going to talk about. Very few carbohydrates. So we're adding some halved grape tomatoes, absolutely gorgeous. We're putting those in there. And then we can't forget our greens. Both of our recipes actually are going to be using a good source of a green leafy vegetable. This recipe is calling for spinach classic. These leaves are a little bit big, so if you prefer, when you're using your spinach, you could chop those up into some smaller pieces. I was not, disturbed, I suppose, by how big they were once it kind of got cooked up. You guys have used spinach before, and you know that once you kind of saute that, it wilts down to some pretty small pieces already. So it looks big as I put it into the mixing bowl, but once it gets cooked, it's not so much like that. So I've got my vegetables in there, my tomatoes, my spinach, and then we're just going to add a little bit of cheese to the recipe. So I want to point out that if you're following along with the recipe PDFs, the recipe that I sent out on Friday had a bit of a typo, and in your directions, it will say a half cup shredded cheddar cheese. But I changed this morning's version. It's just a quarter cup of shredded cheddar cheese. So make that note if you're following along with Friday. So I'm just going to add about a quarter cup of shredded cheese, which I know isn't too much, but Kim will talk about why that kind of is. And we're just going to give that a good mix. And that is all we are going to do with this recipe at this point. So let me get my crock pot here, and we will get this one finished up. So I've got my crock pot already greased essentially. I just used a bit of an olive oil nonstick cooking spray and coated that, because as you're cooking this breakfast casserole in the slow cooker, you can get a little bit of sticking. The recipe does say to cook it on high for 2 to 4 hours. So you do get a little bit more sticking and some brown edges. So always a good idea to use some cooking spray.
And then, Penny, while Tina is doing that, I'm going to go ahead and answer your question. Can I skip the tomatoes? My husband hates them. I'm going to say yes, you definitely can. The great thing about all of our cooking classes is we want you all to make your decisions on what works with you and your family and your taste buds. So if there's a different vegetable that you enjoy to replace the tomatoes, that is completely fine.
Absolutely. So so ask yourself the question, what vegetables do your husband, what vegetables does your husband enjoy? And you can modify any of those vegetables to your liking for anybody in the room, of course. So, one last step before we actually put that slow cooker in the crock pot, we are simply just going to top before we start cooking the top of that recipe with a quarter cup of Parmesan cheese. You know what? I'm going to say this out loud, and Kim will probably talk to you about it as well, but I did not realize that Parmesan cheese had so much sodium. So for a quarter cup of this Parmesan cheese, Kim, that's 480 milligrams of sodium. So with that question that you guys asked earlier, can I skip the salt? Absolutely. We got quite a bit of sodium right here in this Parmesan cheese. So it might even be another swap and modification of changing up the different types of cheeses that you would be using in order to decrease that sodium even further. So quinoa breakfast casserole, done. Kim and Isabel are going to ask you guys a couple of questions while I transition and get our jambalaya ready.
I actually have a question. For those that currently use quinoa, for to help those that have never used it, where do you buy it? Where do you find it? Where in the grocery store do you find it? And so just throw that in the chat, and maybe that'll help others out.
And while you guys are answering Kim's question there, I do want to mention Kathy. Yes, you can definitely use diced tomatoes. I think like a diced basil tomato or a diced Italian seasoning tomato would be delicious in this breakfast casserole. So again, it's really we really like to push using things that you like and that you would eat when we are making these healthy recipes. And then while you guys are answering the question on where you buy the quinoa at, Joan says at Sawalls, they have it in bulk. That sounds great. Right by the rice on the top shelf. Yep, yep. That's usually where I find it too. I prefer using the the tricolor quinoa. Has anybody ever seen it before? The tricolor quinoa is beautiful. It's so pretty in all the recipes. Then Emily, get mine at Meijer. Yeah, quinoa can be found in a lot of different places, so that's great to hear how many of you guys use quinoa. All right. So while Tina is finalizing her setup for the recipe number 2, I would like to know from you all, has anybody ever done a breakfast casserole in a slow cooker before? I've never tried it.
I have, but I've never used quinoa. Never used quinoa.
Yeah, it's a very interesting addition to breakfast casserole that I never would have thought about before.
Tina and I were like mind blown. We're like, we've got to find this.
We were on a mission to find a variation that somebody had already created.
All right, let's see. Someone is asking if mozzarella cheese would be okay instead of using the Parmesan.
Absolutely. What a classic combination, cheddar and mozzarella. So that would absolutely work if that helps you decrease your sodium content, or if you just prefer mozzarella over Parmesan, you can definitely swap that.
Probably will add a little more moisture too.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. It is only a quarter cup, so probably not too much. I was going to say maybe decreasing the milk a little bit, but probably not even.
All right. Are you ready to walk us through recipe 2?
Very good. All right. So recipe number 2, slow cooker jambalaya. I would love to actually hear from you all. Do you guys love cooking jambalaya? Do you cook it often? Have you ever cooked it? Tell me in the chat what your experience with jambalaya is. I had never actually cooked a jambalaya before. Probably not part of my culture to use or eat jambalaya. So I didn't have any experience with it. So by having and enjoying those flavors in a slow cooker, I felt just made that recipe a little bit more approachable, especially for me. So I'm hoping that is the case for you all. Isabel, what's everybody saying about the jambalaya?
Yeah, zero experience, never cooked it or eaten it. Looking forward to it. I haven't often, but husband loves it, orders it when they go out. Yeah, I agree. I have a jambalaya recipe that I love to make in my pressure cooker, which is so delicious, but I don't make it very often. And I just made it last week, and my husband was like, "Oh my goodness, why don't you make this again?" So
Great.
it's been a while.
Love that testimonial. Perfect. Good. All right. Well, great. All right. So this jambalaya recipe, as you're looking through the recipe contents here, include a variety of different protein sources. So right now we've got some already diced up chicken breast. I cut off the extra fat as I was preparing these bite-sized pieces of chicken. And that is about 1 pound, which you have seen the chicken breasts, they're pretty big. So that was about one chicken breast that I used and diced up. And then about 4 ounces of a turkey sausage. Kim will talk to you a little bit about why the turkey sausage option. And that usually comes in about a 12-ounce package. So 4 ounces would just be 1/3 of that turkey sausage that you purchased from the grocery store for this recipe. So that is our base. We've got our chicken and our turkey sausage in our slow cooker right now. You're not going to add the shrimp yet. You do not add the frozen shrimp option to the recipe until you're about 30 minutes from the end of cooking time because the recipe uses already pre-cooked shrimp. And so it just really needs to, thaw and warm up in the recipe. So you don't add the shrimp until 30 minutes before the end of cooking time. So you're not going to see me add that to the slow cooker today, but you will see that in our final product. Again, just like when we provide some variation in our quinoa options with our breakfast casserole, you can create some variation in these recipe choice or these vegetable choices as well. I used a yellow bell pepper in this recipe with the onion, the celery, and the collard greens. I added the yellow because we're also going to be adding tomatoes. So I thought that would provide another color element by getting that red tomato, the green collard greens and celery, yellow bell pepper, just increasing that nutrient value by choosing multiple colors for the recipe. So here in this recipe, I am going to show you that I already have some chopped up collard greens. Would also love to hear how often you guys use collard greens. I've got thinly sliced celery, some onion, and some yellow bell peppers, along with the garlic that I'm just going to throw into the slow cooker right now. So go ahead and put that in the chat. I'd love to hear your experience with collard greens.
And then Kathy says, don't use collard greens, would sub out for spinach.
Sure. Another hardy green like kale would probably be a fine substitute as well. But with like any dark green leafy vegetables like collard green or mustard greens, or even kale, right? They're going to come in a bunch like this at the grocery store with this big, thick stem. So you just want to wash them really, really good. And just like kale, if you have more experience with kale, you're going to want to cut that stem out of the leafy part and then just dice up the leafy part. You can purchase already pre-chopped up kale and collard greens in the store in a bag. That is an option. Just know that you're probably going to get a little bit more stem in that option that you might want to pick out because that might not be very enjoyable to take and eat. So we've got our collard greens, our peppers, our onions, our chicken, and our sausages sitting in here. And then we are just adding a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. That's going to provide that red color in the recipe. We're not adding any salt to this recipe, and Kim will kind of talk a little bit why that is. So our seasonings to the recipe is 1 teaspoon of crushed red pepper and 1 teaspoon of dried thyme, kind of crushed up little thyme leaves. So those are going to be your seasonings. As I mentioned, I've already put some garlic in there as well. So we're just going to mix that up. And that is going to cook on high in the slow cooker as well for about 2.5 to 3 hours. You can cook it on low as well if you wanted to, but look at the colors, right? Maybe you're not getting a great visual of that, but I hope that you're seeing reds and greens and yellows, a very colorful jambalaya option. So from here, I'm going to put that in my slow cooker. We're going to get it cooking, and I'm going to pass it on to Kim now to provide you a little bit of education about these recipes.
All right, thank you, Tina. I'm going to turn your camera off and mute you, and then we will have Kim start.
I've never been so hungry for jambalaya at like 9:30 in the morning. All right, everybody. Oh, now that we're feeling like jambalaya and breakfast casserole, I'm going to change the vibe a little bit and talk a little about just really with these recipes and the benefits of this device, this slow cooker. I know this is a picture of a crock pot, which is a brand name for a slow cooker, which doesn't have to be a crock pot, but the benefit of using a slow cooker, we know that most homes have one. And we might have one somewhere and dig that out seasonally. But what we know is that they're very versatile. I'm going to talk more about that even at the end of today's class, but really the versatility of what we can vary, what we like for preferences for food, and what we can put in this slow cooker and what kind of a meal and breakfast, lunch, dinner, or if it's a dip or a cut of meat. It's energy efficient. We're not running the whole house full of ovens and stoves, really just kind of throwing it in most often. The prep can be fairly easy. We may have to slice and dice some things. Some things are canned, some things might be frozen, but really the prep might be pretty limited. We may have to brown something. Some of our recipes that we find for slow cookers, we may have to pre-browned, um, but really it's limited. Leftovers, I love leftovers. So we may have to consider that, well, we're going to cook this large amount of a recipe, but we can have that for a couple of days, which is nice and easy on us for a couple, we don't have to cook every day. And meal planning can be less stressful. We can use the slow cooker to cook foods, but we can also use a slow cooker to just keep foods warm. So it may not have been cooked in the slow cooker, but actually that device can actually keep a food warm. So we can use that to bring food to like a party or an event just to keep it warm if it was not even originally cooked in that. There's year-round meal appeal. Actually, it should not become dusty. It should be used more often than not. But oftentimes we find it just beneficial for soups and stews, but often it can be used for any time of the year. We find a 1 quart, a little itty bitty, up to a 10 quart. I have myself a 3 to 4 quart, and then I think it's a 6 quart. I'm not sure what size Tina has. I think we did like a 3 to 4, maybe she said, but don't quote me on that. Um, and so we can start with a little slow cooker that might just do a small dip amount up to a large cut of meat, like we've done pork shoulders. Um, and so it's very, very versatile. Can be very safe and easy to maintain. There's ways to clean it easier and keep it clean. But what I like best is that it can be a balanced option for those with diabetes. So I come here today to talk more about that. And with nutrients and with diabetes, we've got these carbohydrates. We hear about the protein nutrient and the fat nutrient. So with these three nutrients, very important to our health, but especially for diabetes, they all represent something for our blood sugar management. And when a meal contains all of these nutrients, in that meal that I will talk about today and share with you in this recipe specifically, you will see your blood sugar stable. So when you have three of these nutrients, you've got carbohydrates, you've got fats, and you've got proteins in one meal that you ate, you'll follow that green line across. You'll have a little bit of rise in blood sugar, but over time it will just normalize. If you were to only have a carb-heavy meal, your blood sugar will follow that blue line. It will go over that roller coaster. It will have a big spike. And of course, we know with diabetes, we don't like those spikes. So with slow cookers, we know that we can incorporate all of these nutrients. So let me break down the jambalaya recipe. So what Tina just last cooked for the jambalaya was our carb nutrients really are the tapioca in the recipe and also the brown rice that's in the recipe. Those two are going to provide us the carbohydrates, the fibers, the starches that our body needs for the energy for our brain, our red blood cells, and actually to keep our blood sugars from dropping too low. They're essential carbohydrates. The balance to that is protein. And the protein in the jambalaya is going to be the variety of chicken. So we've got that lean chicken breast. We've got that smoked turkey sausage that she was chopping and I had chopped up. And then lastly, you didn't see, but you know that there will be some shrimp in there. So we've got a variety of protein in there that I'll talk about later that we can totally vary up because not all of us like those proteins. But that gives us that balance. It keeps our blood sugars right where it's at. It doesn't allow those sugar, those sugars in a food to make our blood sugar spike. Proteins have so many good benefits too. And then the fat in the meat help to also provide us some other nutrients and some that feeling of fullness and satiety. So when you see a recipe that has those three nutrients fulfilled, it will also help your blood sugars. Now, look at that robust list of non-starchy vegetables. They will not impact your blood sugars. They will provide you color, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and even more fiber, and all sorts of seasonings that are no salt. So you've got the benefits of vitamins, nutrients, and fibers in balance. So is the recipe balanced? Yes, it is. Now, let's look at the nutrition profile that is found at the bottom of your recipe. So if you have it printed or on your screen, you'll be able to find it there at the bottom of your sheet there. But I've put it on the screen to highlight. So a nutrition serving size for this recipe is a cup and a third of the mixture and then a third of a cup of rice. So it's actually a decent, nice portion for this meal. Now we look and the calories are only 292 calories for this meal. So less than 500 calories for this meal. That's great. And it's balanced. You've got everything right there. The fat, the total fat is limited, it's low, and we actually can claim that this meal is low in saturated fat. It's actually a true health claim because it's less than 1 gram or less. So that's really good for our heart. It's low in that unhealthy fats. So anything we might think of like from those proteins that might be a little unheart healthy, we would say it's pretty low in that. Now let's talk about the sodium. Tina said we aren't adding any salt to this recipe, and I would talk about why. What are we getting that sodium from? When we look, we find sodium in smoked foods. We find sodium in canned foods. We do not find sodium in any fresh foods or any sort of like fresh grains. So really the culprits are going to be our canned tomatoes and our smoked meat. So how do we modify this? And we'll kind of talk about that in our next slide because we're going to want to bring that down a little bit. A recipe that has close to about 200 milligrams or less is probably more ideal, especially if we're trying to watch our sodium intake, if we have heart health that we want to keep in mind, okay? So really, we're going to want to try to modify that. The carbohydrates in the protein are very, very close together in number. That means it's balanced. This is not going to spike your blood sugar. So this is a really good balance in those two numbers. And another claim that we can say is it's an excellent source of fiber. Where does all the fiber come from? It's over 5 grams of fiber from all of our grain, our vegetables. It's excellent. So pretty ideal, except for the sodium. So let's talk about that.
Before you move on,
Yep.
Kim, I want to lift
Yep.
up a couple of things in the chat. Gina wants to know if there is a replacement for tapioca.
Good question. That I would have to kind of, I mean, it could be kind of used as like a thickener, could be like a cornstarch,
I
is
can chime in.
my thought.
I can chime in on that too. So, and thanks for Kim for even bringing up the tapioca. I actually opted out of that ingredient. I didn't have it at home, didn't feel the need to purchase it because I won't use it
Mhm.
again. It was a small amount, and honestly, if you don't have it in your pantry already, the recipe does not need it. The jambalaya worked perfectly without it, so totally okay to skip it.
I was going to say in my jambalaya, I use a little bit of cornstarch. So I wouldn't have thought about I would say replacing it if you it and we only use like a tablespoon or two. So it's the equivalent, I would say, would be the cornstarch if you felt like you needed something to kind of thicken anything up. But it sounds like for Tina, she would say that this recipe is adequate without. Did you have something else, Isabel?
There were a couple other things in the chat. Jane had suggested for the canned tomatoes using a no salt added canned tomato,
Sure.
which is great. And
Yep.
then Kathy wants to know if you can use fresh tomatoes instead of the canned tomatoes and season with fresh spices.
Absolutely. Anything fresh, definitely. Anything fresh would be best. You can definitely cut that sodium at least in half if you rinse the can of tomatoes. That will cut the sodium in at least half, but you will not be providing any sodium if you put in something fresh. So it would really reduce it if you try something fresh versus canned. But if you have a can already in your pantry, go ahead and rinse that. That will cut that sodium in half.
And then one last question. Jill says they're highly allergic to all shellfish. What
Mhm.
fish could they substitute?
I mean, really, this is so variable in proteins. So really, it's kind of a jambalaya is I've seen like an andouille sausage in instead of like a smoked turkey to kind of give it that southern feel. Um, really the any protein to kind of vary that up, and we could use different like seasonings and spices to kind of give it that kick that we need to. So for sure, we want to stay away from those allergies. So when we look at swaps and modifications, you guys already have started tackling those. The sausage, the smoked sausage, we probably want to look at the food labels and try to compare some of that sodium and shoot for something that's less in sodium. That's really the thing in this recipe we want to decrease. We can vary the greens, just like Tina said. If you don't care for or don't have on hand the collard greens, go for kale or spinach. Actually, spinach has been difficult for me to get at my store that I've been shopping at. So, really, what's available and what you like. And the vegetables that are in this can vary too. If you don't have a red or a yellow bell pepper and you've got to go for green or you've got to go for red, or you don't have celery, but you've got something else, absolutely. Robust um, veggies in a recipe only make that so nutrient dense. Rinse those canned tomatoes for a lower sodium content, but as someone else has said, definitely fresh would help with that. And add salt-free seasonings. Fresh seasonings would be so, so good. You can vary the shrimp size. It doesn't have to be, the medium. Others like them jumbo or large size, depending on what you can find on sale. So lots of variability, versatility here. All right. So if we're ready to move on to looking at the first recipe Tina assembled, which was the slow cooker, we're going to kind of go through that one and dissect that. The carbohydrates that would be identified in this recipe are going to be that quinoa, but it's also a protein. So that's also listed under those proteins. I'm sorry to have put the eggs under the carbs. I don't know why that is there, but the milk is a carbohydrate identified in this recipe. It's a little bit of milk. The lactose is the sugar in the milk. So we put that as a carbohydrate source. So quinoa and milk are the carbohydrate source in this recipe. The protein sources is going to be the quinoa, the eggs, and the cheese. With that said, we can vary up the eggs. We can use an egg substitute, which I don't always like because it's a packaged product, so it's sodium containing, or we could use 2 egg whites to 1 egg yolk. So we're using a lot more eggs, which right now it's hard to get our hands on eggs in the store, but we can lower some of that fat content if we don't like that, or the sodium, by just using 2 eggs, 2 egg whites to 1 egg yolk, if we don't want to dabble into those substitutes in the store. The cheeses are our protein, but the cheeses are our fat content, and they also are sodium containing. So really looking at that sodium content of the cheese, and we'll talk about that the next slide. The vegetables we've got, which we've already talked about, what can we do different? Some of us don't like tomatoes. Can we vary up the greens? Absolutely. Throw anything you've got in your fridge that you need to use up from other recipes in this recipe, whether it be a different color or texture. It's really, the sky's the limit. More nutrients, the better. So when we look at the nutrition profile, and again, you can find that on your recipe we had in the email, the calorie amount for this is still very minimal. It's almost 300 calories, though it's way under that 500 calorie limit. The fat content, we got to consider how to lower that a little bit. We want to look at what is the fat containing sources. So that would be the eggs and the cheese. And so again, I talked to you about, maybe using some egg whites. The egg whites are non-fat containing. So getting rid of some of the yolks would lower the fat content. And also maybe looking at using a 2% milk cheese versus a full fat cheese, or just reducing the portion of the cheese in this, which also would lower that sodium. That sodium content, again, has to lower some. Using less cheese, finding, looking at cheeses, different cheeses in the store. Parmesan is a high sodium content cheese. Finding something that's got a little bit less in there. Or just using less. The carbs and the proteins are definitely balanced. So it's a nice recipe for our blood sugars, for sure. And fiber, I like to see a little bit of a boost. I want to get that up a little bit more. 5 grams is an excellent source. How can we do that? I would go for some more vegetables in this. I would add a little more veggies, make it a little more robust. But how can we do that? I would throw some more veggies in it, but let's talk about that.
Before we move on to the next slide, Kathy would like to know if cheeses on the block are better than packaged cheeses.
Really, it's a it's a fat containing, sodium containing product. So really the comparison, um, the re the comparison isn't going to be significantly different in I think it's going to be just either reducing the portion that you're using or really comparing side to side, seeing where you can make those adjustments. It's not going to be significant between block and packaged. So with that said, we're already using 1% milk, so it's a low fat milk. So we could go down to skim milk, right? Or we could go to a plant-based milk, especially if we're considering, heart health, and we really want to get that cholesterol, that fat intake lower. So we could use a skim milk or perhaps an almond or soy-based. There's so many plant-based milks in the store, a Fairlife milk, but we want to definitely consider maybe varying up the milk if we have that in the home. I've talked to you about egg substitutes, so that would help the fat content lower, but be cautious of that packaged egg substitute in the store. That's going to contain some more sodium. Oh, the salt usage. Yes, I would just wipe that out. I would just take that out. That's simply just an easy place to just take that sodium right out. Because there's definitely enough in the cheese. You could use salt substitutes if you need a little bit of that, maybe some of those seasonings back, some of those Mrs. Dash and some of those things added back. You can vary the greens, the spinach, you could do kale, whatever you like in there, and add in more veggies, and definitely looking at your cheeses. But how can we add more fiber besides adding more veggies? You guys have any ideas? Add that in the chat. Do they have anything, Isabel?
Nothing in the chat yet. There was a comment about how some packaged used products to keep the shredded cheese to keep it from sticking together, similar to cornstarch or other. Add okra, add peppers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, those are just some of the comments in the chat so far to lift up, but
Yeah.
nothing else.
Okay. Okay. Well, one of my last thoughts here is the versatility. So when I think about proteins and how versatile in a slow cooker, you can try in all these animal proteins. So, your chicken, your beef, your turkey, your pork, but also plant-based proteins, just like we did today with our quinoa. And you can even do beans, especially those that are conscious of their heart health. So it's very, very versatile in that. And actually, it's pretty cost effective to mix proteins because buying chorizo or andouille sausage and shrimp might be a little much. But if we add in a little beef, or if we add in a little, lean beef, or a little bit of boneless, skinless chicken, we might be able to bring down that cost of that meal a little bit. Slow cookers are very versatile, and when we consider fibers, because we can we can have this low carb slow cooker meal that we can add some fibers to in the slow cooker or as a side dish. So some like to consider like a low carb option, like a cauliflower rice, where we either microwave that or we have it in like a saucepan, like the boil in a bag. We can add, whole grain rice or other whole grains as a side dish if we find that the slow cooker doesn't provide us all of the balance we need. The other thing is we can find that we can add more vegetables to this slow cooker recipes, and especially our green or very colorful vegetables. If we find that we need a little bit of a boost, we can always add a heart healthy fat like almonds, or we can add beans, or we can add an oil, a little bit of an oil, or perhaps a whole fruit on the side just to balance this recipe out. So you can kind of see where a slow cooker can be very versatile. You can have this balanced meal, but you can also put a little bit of a boost on the side of the meal to just ensure you have that best meal for your blood sugar, um, and keep you stable and healthy. So I think that's all I have.
Yeah, before we jump into our question and answer portion of our presentation, I'm gonna give the screen back to Tina so you guys can see how lovely this dish has turned out. So if you give me 1 minute. All
Oh,
right, there you go.
very, yes, thank you. Thanks, Isabel. Thanks, Kim, for all of that information on how to make blood sugar friendly meals and how to modify a recipe that maybe you have stumbled upon and how to make it best suitable for you and your health needs. Great suggestions. I loved all of the ideas that you guys had. So, one of the ending points that Kim had, and even though I'm speaking right now, I want you guys to think of additional questions and pop them into the chat. So, one of the final points that Kim had been making was around the rice and maybe using a brown rice or maybe swapping it out for a cauliflower rice. I think when people are living with diabetes, one of the primary concerns tends to revolve around options like rice and potatoes and pasta. And so hopefully you guys have some new information and new knowledge about how to still use something like a brown rice in a blood sugar friendly way. And I just want to add a little bit of information on that as well. So while Kim was providing some education, I made some brown rice. And so Kim went through that nutrition information, and you saw that the portion size for the rice was small. It was 1/3 of a cup with about 1 1/3 cup of your jambalaya mixture. So you're getting more of that protein, more of those low sodium seasonings, more of those vegetables while still using some of that fiber source from the brown rice. Now we used quinoa in the breakfast casserole. So if you've got extra quinoa on the pantry as well, feel free to cook that up. Quinoa can be used as a replacement truly in any recipe that you might use rice for. So think about how maybe you could use the quinoa as well as a good, a slightly superior fiber source and that plant-based protein. So I just wanted to show you guys portion size. 1/3 cup of brown rice is all this recipe is calling for. And I just wanted to show what that looked like. And again, I'm using a fairly small like salad plate of sorts. So we're starting out with 1/3 of a cup of that brown rice, still getting that fiber source, still enjoying some of a rice option. You can do that and still make a blood sugar friendly meal with diabetes. And then I'm just going to add some of my jambalaya mixture right on top. Got all of those greens included as well. Colorful with the fiber, the brown rice, the greens. I can see that yellow bell pepper in there. We got the red from the tomatoes. Smells absolutely heavenly. What a beautiful, nutritious, blood sugar friendly dish in that slow cooker jambalaya recipe. And then we've got the breakfast casserole. So if you looked at that recipe again, the serving size was 1/4 of the recipe. I actually cut my breakfast casserole into 6 servings, and this is what my 1/6 of the recipe looked like. So a quarter of that recipe is pretty significant, was still pretty low calorie with all of those vegetables. Again, great ideas on really increasing that fiber even further by adding more vegetables or having a good source of a high fiber fruit on the side, because that would still be a good amount of fiber that would make it blood sugar friendly with the protein that the breakfast casserole provides. So you can see my breakfast casserole. It's got the quinoa in there. It's got the green from the spinach, the red from the tomatoes. Absolutely delicious. So there are our finished slow cooker recipes. Top your jambalaya with a little bit of fresh parsley. I loved your guys' idea on using some fresh herbs, and you've got yourself a balanced blood sugar friendly meal. What questions do you guys have? We got a few minutes left. All right. Well, if no questions, then Kim, why don't you talk us about diabetes education and medical nutrition therapy?
Um, Penny wants to know if you could do any of these in an Instant Pot.
Isabel, you probably have more, maybe Kim, more experience with the Instant Pot than I, or a pressure cooker. So I will defer that question to you all.
I've never made either of these recipes in the Instant Pot, but I do feel like they could be used in an Instant Pot. I do feel like the Instant Pot is pretty versatile, just like a slow cooker is. So I would say experiment with it and let us know if it works out, because I would love to know. And if I can make these in my Instant Pot, that would be fantastic. All right. Kathy says, no questions, thank you, but please bring us more recipes for future Zooms. You got it. We actually have another diabetes cooking club coming up next month. I don't remember what that one is though. Kim or Tina, do you recall?
It was around sweet treats because it's February, Valentine's Day month, and Heart Month. So we're going to focus on sweet treats. We don't know what we're doing yet, so stay tuned. Register. All of our classes are open right now in 2025 for you to register. We hope that you will join us again for a future diabetes cooking club. Thank you guys so much for attending.
Thank you.
Everybody, we really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day.
Bye.